now we move on to, I think, more the fun part, the plenary panel. But I want to just maybe have 3 quick notes, maybe one a safety note. If in the event that there is any incident today, I think folks are aware there are stairwells just outside of this auditorium to your left and to your right, take you right onto the street. The second thing I'd like to point your attention to are some of our social media opportunities. We've already begun a conversation this morning on Twitter. For those of you who are really interested in social media, I encourage you to follow and to contribute. We'll be tracking that and really embedding your ideas into this conversation. And we've thrown up a couple of also Twitter accounts that are relevant, but you'll see those also embedded in your agenda. And I think a third point that I'd like to mention is, and I will kick off our panel with a series of interviews that we've conducted over the past 4 to 5 weeks with innovation stakeholders and leaders from across the country to help really think about framing some of the perspectives that we're going to be exploring today. But I have the opportunity now to introduce our first plenary panel. We will be led by our moderator, Dr. Pramod Karganikar, the Assistant Director and the Director of Engineering at the National Science Foundation. And joining him on the panel will be Dr. Ileana Arias from the Centers for Disease Control, Dr. Paul Homert, the President and Laboratories Director from Sandia National Laboratories, Dr. Mark Little from GE, and Mr. Rod McCoskey, the Senior Vice President for Corporate Engineering Technology and Operations at Lockheed. But before I kick that off, we're going to just show a quick 2-minute video to really set the stage for this panel. You'll be hearing from Dr. Pradeep Khosla, the Chancellor of UC San Diego. Pradeep, I think in this video, really captures some of the critical themes that are going to be underpinning this panel. Major trends, technological, social, economic, that will really set the stage for today's conversation.
We are changing in many, many ways. So first of all, we have a large program internally, just created it, investing like $5 to $7 million a year in integrated data infrastructure. So every piece of equipment on our campus, all the microscopes, all the data gathering piece of equipment are on the internet connected to what we think of as a big data repository. Our library is one of the leading, Geisel Library is one of the leading players in curation of digital data. And what does it mean to curate digital data for the future? Because we think the books are going to be replaced by data that is generated through experiments. A big program is going to be in big data-driven therapies. How do I model the human being and capture a complete model of chemistry, biochemistry, your cell structures, your DNA, your genetics, your microbiome, and just about everything in a digital form, and how do I then use that to create therapies just for you? So it's clinical trials in one is what I call it. As fast as we are changing our research and as agile we are in changing our research direction, I must say that we are not that agile in changing our pedagogy and delivery of education, and it is the education system across the whole country. But I think you're seeing those changes happening. You're seeing a lot of companies that are focused on digital delivery, e-learning, technology-enhanced learning. I think a lot of it is hype, but a lot of it is not. So we will have to see how it shakes down over the next 2 to 4 years. What I'm noticing is research is becoming more and more expensive. Not many universities can afford to be top-notch research universities in the country. Having said that, this country lives on research. That has been the driver of our innovation and our economy, right? So we are in a bind right now. And I think the way we're going to get out of this bind is by doing what I think of as crowdsourced research, where you would capture a whole lot of data and information in large digital infrastructure and then open it up to the smartest people in the country and the world who are not necessarily at your university or your lab to look at that and innovate based on that.
Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So we have had wonderful plenary speeches, and as Dr. Cordova said, the challenge is clear. So I don't want to take too much time sort of setting the stage for today's panel, this particular panel. Just a couple of points. I want to think of innovation ecosystem, which to me means universities, industry, ranging from large, medium, small to startups and scale-ups, that whole ecosystem of industry, government, national labs, funding agencies like NSF, NIH, and Department of Energy, and so forth, and investors, again, ranging from angel, venture, corporate investors, and public investors, and so forth. So these are all different entities that are interacting with each other in this ecosystem. And the reason I think we should think about ecosystem is that the hierarchical models of command and control no longer work. And so we are really thinking about more of a network structure where people and organizations are connected to each other in sort of a mutually dependent manner. They derive value from interactions with each other. And also networks at the individual levels, that people are interconnected through professional organizations, through their workplaces, and the whole democratization of innovation that was mentioned in earlier talks also speaks to networks at the individual levels. A key to develop, so this ecosystem produces innovations that benefit the nation in terms of addressing major grand challenges, ranging from jobs and economic growth. I mean, one of the major concerns right now is that economic growth is slowing down. Productivity growth is slowing down. And clearly, research-based innovations are going to be a big part of the solution to that problem. But we also have grand challenges such as food, energy, water, environment, health and well-being, security, education, and so on and so forth. So we have these big challenges and big opportunities. And to kick off the panel, what I would like to begin with is to have our panelists talk about how they see collaboration within the organization and also with other partners across university, industry, government sectors to drive a thriving innovation ecosystem for the United States. Whoever wants to pick up.
Well, let's see. I'll comment. Paul Homer from Sandia Laboratories, and just to set the stage for us, we're a national security laboratory, and the world is still very complex in a national security sense. And our role is really to bring science and technology innovation to national security applications. And it's been our view increasingly that the level of competition there, the level of innovation occurring worldwide, demands of us different models, and that we think differently about how we approach it. And collaboration, partnership is critical to that. I'll just give you one example, and then we'll continue with the panelists here. We've recognized and have had for many, many years extensive partnerships with the university system and a great strength of the country. But we've recognized that it's not strategic enough from our standpoint. It's not allowing us to sufficiently tap the depth and focus it in a way that leverages our resources more effectively. So in the last year, we've established, and today, this afternoon, a fifth of these I'll sign with President Peterson, strategic memorandums of understanding with 5 universities in the country that we think are key to a more strategic research agenda, a more effective attraction and retention pipeline, an attempt to demonstrate a model in which the country's largest national laboratory and a set of universities can create a different national presence and national ecosystem between those two parts of our overall engineering excellence in the country. Also some things to improve our ability to do technology transition and transfer. Those universities for us are Purdue, University of Illinois, University of Texas, and Georgia Tech, and locally for us, University of New Mexico. And that's an example of something that we just have to take to a higher level, and we're very excited about signing that this afternoon with President Peterson.
At the CDC, as many of you probably know, our primary mandate is to make sure that we save lives and protect people. That's something that we've been doing from the beginning of the inception of the agency. We continue to do now. It has not changed, and the fundamental way that we do that also hasn't changed. At any point in time, though, we are always trying, and by the way, that basically is just sort of monitoring what's happening and making sure that we identify what is a problem, what's an emerging problem, what's a possible or potential problem, and then very quickly identifying effective, efficient, affordable ways of preventing, mitigating, or controlling those problems. That has not changed. At any point in time, what we are interested in is making sure that we can do that in the quickest way possible, the most effective way possible, and again, the most efficient possible. That's where innovation comes from. The catalyst really to innovation at the CDC and the work that we do, whether that's in lab work or in surveillance or any other kind of work that we do, really is more of a social catalyst, if you will. Most of the changes that have taken place, both culturally in terms of recognizing the role of innovation, has been the result of interfacing with the private sector and with corporate America. We recognized early on that public health is the result of three forces coming together, and they have to come together in a very efficient and effective way. That's government, academia, and then business. We have a tradition of involving academia. We have been a little bit slow in involving corporate America and the private sector in that, and that's something that has to change. If it doesn't change, we're not effective, and we're never going to be either in getting the support that we need to have the impact that we want to have, but also to develop the technologies that we need to rely on in order to be effective. The reason that has become so incredibly important and has been so effective in us moving forward has to do with sort of cultural challenges within government and at CDC specifically. And that is that we have incredibly smart people, but they've been trained in a certain way. They have a significant way of doing things, and they believe that what they're doing is all that they need. They come to CDC, continue to do that, don't see anything else. And even the contact with academia sort of stands in the way of moving forward and thinking of different things. The other is although we do some work behind the scenes to try to get at prevention, a lot of what we do, as you can see in the news coverage of what it is that we're engaged in, is really reactive. So that the focus is stepping in, doing it quickly, and not having the time to sort of think ahead of how it is that that's going to be done. Most of the innovations that take place internally that are initiated by our staff really is in response to solving a problem during an investigation, during an outbreak, during a response, which is not the best way of developing that sort of innovative stance over time. Again, where that has changed is where we interface with corporate America that has certain needs and perspectives, and providing us gentle feedback on how it is that we do things. One of the things that would be incredibly important for us to do, and we're making headway in that, is how is it that we start to change that internal culture? That innovation is not just gimmicks, it's not just sort of things that you do and then they go away, but it's a commitment to making sure that you're on the cutting edge of any technology, whether, again, it's in a lab or in a community-based intervention. That becomes very difficult, again, given how it is that we are funded, how it is that we are mandated to work, but we're looking into models for then doing that. And to be fair, a lot of that is sort of putting it outside of the agency. What are the structures that we can create, whether it's a consortium or other kinds of structure that can be created outside of the agency that pull for that innovation from individuals who we have in the agency who already are poised to contribute to that, but then for those who are not, eventually see the value of that and then come on board.
So I lead GE Global Research. It's the first industrial research center formed in the United States back in 1900 out of the original GE company. I've been leading the center for 10 years, and a lot has changed. We've globalized. We started in upstate New York. We've opened up in India, Bangalore, Shanghai, China, Munich, Germany. We came back to the United States in Detroit area for advanced manufacturing. We're in Oklahoma for oil and gas. We're in the Silicon Valley area for software. We're in Rio de Janeiro. We're expanding into Israel, Saudi Arabia. We've done all that to continuously refresh ourselves, to go where the action is, to be where our customers are, and to be in every source of innovation. But beyond that, in every center we've changed the way we think, the way we work. It's a very natural thing for us to work with universities. We've been doing so for many, many years. We have over 300 connections, typically researcher to researcher. The model continues to change. I find the U.S. universities more willing to engage, to open up, to explore different, less protective models. I think that's good for both sides. We have connections with smaller companies now in many, many areas. We have very natural collaborations with big companies of all sorts, oil and gas space, aviation space, healthcare. It's, again, very natural. We've started a venture capital activity to enable us to get close to sources of nascent innovation. We're investing alongside them in injecting our technology and our distribution systems to enable them to grow, while we get access to insight into emerging technologies. And we work with the government quite closely in the US principally, but in other places as well, to access their source of innovation. We continue to work with the national labs to try to get closer partnerships, to get more and more activities out of there. And we even do things like crowdsourcing innovation. We've had some open calls for collaboration, things like 3D printed aircraft parts. That competition was won by a young man with not a whole lot of technical training from Malaysia. We've gone to the other side of the spectrum to solutions for breast cancer, where you need very sophisticated teams of researchers to work on those problems, and we've got connections with large-scale universities and so on. So we continuously change our thinking, our model, and our engagement processes.
Okay, so go last here, so how do I add to that? So, all right, very, very similar to Mark and Paul's, probably in our business, somewhat different markets. But when we look at it in the collaboration and expanding collaboration, we've always had heavy collaboration with universities, government labs, and all different types of business. But I would say now it's probably a couple different ways. One is going more focus for what we're going to do internally versus who we're going to partner with. You know, we're very good at certain things, and other things maybe we're not the best at. And I think we used to tend to try to do more internally than externally. So the collaboration is finding the best sources, you know, with the brightest ideas, whether it's a university or a lab, and then leveraging them into the team in an open environment. We find it's actually kind of the pull from the I-Corps, I think, is to give the challenge versus asking for a technology, to give the challenge of what we're trying to solve, and then see if we can get the innovative ideas coming back to us. And that's probably a big change for us. We used to be very targeted to ask for what we want versus, you know, what we're looking to solve. And then even within prioritization of what we're looking at with this rapidly changing environment, it's harder than ever, I think, to prioritize, to figure out, you know, where you want to go, what the good ideas are, where to stop as new technologies come on. So the dynamic environment is driving this, but it also makes it more complex.
So I just want to pick up on something that we have learned through our I-Corps program, and Dr. Cordova talked about it. When we talk to faculty and graduate students who have gone through that program, one thing we hear sort of invariably is it has been transformative. It changes the way they think about formulating research questions. And many times we hear that, oh, having gone through this experience, I will do my next research project in a very different way. That is, I will talk to potential customers, if you will, or potential users of my research before I invest 5 or 7 years on doing something. Which raises a question, because that knowledge and insight is coming from potential users of this research, translated into real-world impacts, which comes from private sector and users. So would like to hear a panel's view on how can we better connect university researchers to potential unmet needs that you all see in at a much closer range than academic researchers might.
I mean, that's a great point. In fact, the way that we started, we have developed a significantly stronger relationship with Georgia Tech specifically than we ever have in the past. Not surprisingly, most of the connection had been with medical schools and schools of public health. The engineering focus was something that we decided was missing and was holding us back. One of the things that became very clear when we got together was we have a significant number of problems that we don't have solutions to. We don't even have people who can begin to think through those solutions because of either they don't have the skills or they have other things. When we met with academia, when we met with Georgia Tech specifically, they had a number of solutions that they didn't know there were problems for. And so I think, again, what I said before was the catalyst was that connection mostly to corporate America, but then also now with sort of different sectors of academia to say, look, this is what we're facing currently. Here are the health issues that we see coming. We have to fix this, whether it's how is it that we control and use the microbiome, how is it that we improve analytics in a lab. These are problems that we have. A lot of the times we find the solutions are there, if not final, almost final, and it's just a matter of linking the two. So I think that the sort of recognizing on our part that we have to have those conversations outside of government, outside of our own even group, to be able to say, this is what's coming. Everybody knows it's coming, but we've identified exactly what it is that we need to get done, but we don't know how to do it, and we don't know who's going to do it. And usually there are other people who are equally, or if not smarter than we are, who can then actually figure that out.
One of the things that we've found is that the sort of traditional kind of linear model, basic to applied, that we have to force ourselves to create venues that take you out of that model, whether internally or with our external partners in research, that we're forcing people coming with different perspectives, perhaps more in a basic perspective, more in applied, together early, give them a kind of rallying call. We've restructured a lot of our research in using a sort of decadal horizon research challenges, things like cyber resiliency, trusted communications, big data science, et cetera. Things that we think are inherently interdisciplinary, inherently require basic and applied conversations all the way through in order to really transform the landscape scientifically. Certainly for us, as I mentioned before, having the academic partners that we're now reaching out to more strategically, engaged in those kind of venues, is very, very important. And I think you have to have that kind of innovate in the way you innovate, so to speak.
So I had mentioned that we have hundreds of university partnerships, and there's a best practice that comes to my mind about connections between universities and GE in particular. So it happens that the research center we have in the Munich area is on the edge of the Technical University of Munich. That proximity is very helpful for us and for them, I think. We have many students working on their PhD theses, working in our research center, very actively engaged. We have used the facilities in the university. In fact, rather than build our own, we've invested our own money on top of the resources inside the university to build up their capabilities. And we use their testing facilities, often run by the professors and the students. The university has attracted world-class professors to their campus because of our proximity. It's really a best-in-class thing. And there are two things that stick out for me with respect to comparison to U.S. universities in general. And one is the openness to having their PhD students working on industrial research, which is not the general practice in the United States. And the other is the willingness to share resources with us and not have any significant IP barriers. So this, for me, is a best practice. I see a number of U.S. universities moving toward things like that, and I hope we can work from GE in a better way with U.S. universities like that.
I would agree on the IP barriers. I mean, we have that to varying levels in the collaboration we have. And the more we can move to a more open environment, I think the more collaboration you'll see. Also, we were talking about dinner last night about this alignment of research and investments. And it's kind of interesting, though, because where that alignment, I think, will provide the pull, and it'll get the ideas across the valley of death that we talk about. But I also worry sometimes as we prioritize and we align that when you drive that too far, you're going to drive the innovation out of the teams that you're trying to get from them. So there's a fine balance on there. So I think as we pull these teams together, we have to also leave the space for them to be inventive and innovative.
Sort of the next theme that I would like the panel to talk about is this idea of regional innovation ecosystem. So we all admire the success of Silicon Valley and Boston and so forth, but we envision a future where different parts of the United States will develop their own local regional innovation ecosystems that leverage local competitive strengths, which could be a research university, community colleges, the whole educational enterprise, companies, and customers who might be in that region. But as we think about these systems, we realize that they have to operate in a hyper-competitive global economy. So yeah, you can have an idea about what, say, Atlanta region would have as its competitive strength. Every entity in Atlanta region is competing in a global economy. So I would like the panel to sort of talk about how they see development of thriving regional local innovation ecosystems that would be successful in this globalized world that we live in.
I mean, I think the initial step is recognition that it is all global. I mean, nothing is national anymore. For us, that's been very clear. You know, the things that we've had to face over the last couple of years has been very visible, but even before then, it is a global theater for us. Public health is global. One of the things that we are very fortunate now to be able to have the administration and the government implement is the Global Health Security sort of program, that the idea is to sort of replicate that ability, the infrastructure in every country possible, or at least high-risk countries, that can monitor and then respond quickly. That all is going to depend on IT systems, the ability, and then the sort of skills of those individuals, not only in being able to detect disease and respond to it, but then maintain the systems that are going to allow, whether both lab systems and surveillance systems, to be able to do that. That is a global effort. That is not just us. We provide sort of guidance for that, but then we're going to rely on, you know, local and then international sort of firms who are going to provide that kind of training, who are going to provide that kind of you know, development of systems, equipment, and other capacities that are going to be required to maintain that.
If I may?
Yeah, sure.
So the U.S. university system can be an anchor for these kinds of things, and in my view, having seen a lot of things around the world, the U.S. university system is still best in class by a very large measure. It's a tremendous competitive advantage. So building off that can really help. Companies have a role, governments have a role. Really kind of interesting example for me is a local one in my area in upstate New York. We have what was called the College of Nanoscience and Engineering in Albany, where you see the government, industry, and the university coming together in a very powerful way to have major investment and build what is, I think, the best in the world center for semiconductor basic research. And that has created a thriving infrastructure which has allowed industry and the university and the government to continue to build on that platform to really drive, in a part of the world that some may not find as attractive as Silicon Valley or Boston, a real center of technical excellence and growth.
You know, this is a very interesting challenge, the regional one, and you know, my laboratory is predominantly located in Albuquerque, New Mexico, right. So it's a fairly isolated location, and we participate in what is an effort that I think has been being invigorated by the city and the state and the research university, University of Mexico, to really bring together what was sort of obvious strengths that we really haven't before. 2 large laboratories, Los Alamos, Sandia, the Air Force Research Lab. But it's clear that without every component of that ecosystem, the government, the universities, and in this case, the research laboratories, sort of pulling the oars together, it's very difficult to overcome some of the things that don't work in the favor of that region. There are many strengths in the region, but there are also things that you know, have to be overcome. And so I think that how any part of that ecosystem can learn from, in fact, venues like this or what's going on in other regions, Atlanta and others that have been very, very successful, is going to be important if we're going to see those regional developments have greater success around the country. And you know, Albuquerque is an interesting area that has to learn from that.
I would agree with Paul on that. You have to get the recipe right for them, and we see this pull, the tug of war, really almost within our investments of the outreach that we're doing in the local community and trying to build the regional areas versus reaching out for the best that's available out there. And so if you don't have the investment in the area, you don't have the collaboration between industry, universities, and the government, you're probably going to see us going outside of it. So it's a little bit of a balance that we're trying to strike in there, and you have to have it right in order for it to work.
I'll ask one last question, and then we will sort of open it up to audience participation. The idea of open innovation and democratization of innovation came up earlier. I would be curious to hear panel's views on how do you see open innovation platforms or approaches working with your organizational structures and imperatives.
Yeah, I see it as one tool in a toolkit that's broader than that, and I see it as interesting, exciting, but at this point in time, at least in my world, not a powerful driver for us. I think in our world, we do better with big company connections, even small company connections, but the open innovation stuff has been a nice supplement to what we already have, but by itself, it's not a core driver. Not strong enough for that. That's my view.
Anybody else wants to take that up?
Well, look, I mean, you know, in my case, we deal in a national security environment. It's often a classified environment. So what the open innovation for us actually has some different but powerful concepts that if we can open the environment inside of the fence, so to speak, to particularly for our early career staff who are more expecting of a kind of highly networked and collaborative information environment. So the concepts apply. I mean, it's not perhaps the same as crowdsourcing. We're not crowdsourcing some of our products per se, but there is those learnings that we are trying deliberately to bring into our environment to help create a stronger innovation ecosystem internally.
Similar to your experience, for us, the security issues are huge and makes it significantly difficult to do that. In situations where we have either considered or attempted to do it, the other big concern has to do with how is it that coming up with a system for evaluating the quality of the information that you get in that kind of crowdsourcing approach to solutions. In that, again, we're very cognizant and have to work very hard to make sure that whatever we do, whatever we support is right. And so there's a lot of concern about how is it that, once you open things up in that way without creating a lot of barriers or a lot of criteria before people get involved, that the output of that thinking, the output of that work is going to meet that level of I guess, value in the result.
Yeah, we have several ongoing initiatives internally, again, to look at, I guess you could call it crowdsourcing type things. But it's interesting when Paul brought up the generational differences. One of the things that you will find is the younger generation does expect it. They expect to have these opportunities. They all want to hear their ideas heard, and they have very good ideas. And one of the things we're putting a lot of focus on is to get our more seasoned engineers and scientists coupled up with multidisciplinary teams, but also multi-generational teams, because sometimes we see that some of our best ideas come out when you get that strong dynamic between the people, steeped in experience, coupled with someone with good ideas, and it's just absolutely fearless. And when you put them together, really good things come out.
Yeah, I would just add one other thing. We've started this thing we picked up from the Wharton School of Business called innovation tournaments internally, where we attempt to create classical brainstorming environments, but couple it with the fact that the brainstorming is connected to potentially discretionary investment, so that ideas that find their way through a competitive environment those who had those ideas can see them, immediately picked up on. That there's feedback, as quickly as possible. It doesn't go into some large bureaucratic process, which we're often good at. And so again, it's an attempt to try to bring something more fresh and different in the way we work internally on an idea generation and follow through.
So at this point, I'm going to sort of open up the conversation to the audience, and the first question will come from Jasmine Burton, who is sitting right here.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. This conversation has been incredibly engaging, and it's such a pleasure to be here. So my name is Jasmine Burton, and I am a recent graduate from the Georgia Tech Industrial Design Program, and I design toilets. In 2014, my senior design team was the first all-female team to win the Georgia Tech Inventure Prize competition for our invention, the Safi Cho toilet. The winnings enabled us to go to a refugee camp last summer and pilot the design, and I have since been able to found Wish for Wash LLC, which is a social impact organization that is intended to bring innovation to sanitation. Throughout my experience, I've kind of realized that I have been able to get to the point where I am today through an extensive community of support, whether that's my family or friends or mentors. It's been able to plug me in with the Georgia Tech community, has enabled me to participate in programs like Innovation Corps, has enabled me to compete in competitions like the Inventure Prize competition. And all of these things have kind of opened the doors for me to, I guess, taste the fruits of some of these democratizing of innovation. So having access to DIY spaces, 3D printing places as well, which has been really critical to the development of my social startup. However, I've also kind of realized that this privilege, this access, is not a privilege to everyone, especially people who don't historically have these extensive communities of support. And so I know that we've kind of mentioned this several times today, but I would like to kind of address what are some of the efforts or initiatives that are in place to kind of bring more underrepresented minorities to the table, especially since we know that some of today's minorities are projected to be tomorrow's majority, and kind of to ensure that this pool of innovators isn't shrinking over time. So any efforts or initiatives would be greatly appreciated.
I'd be happy to try this one. The easy part is the very strong diversity efforts that big companies like GE have, and I'm sure all the others do as well. So we do a lot of outreach to people. I'm in a world where we hire PhD people mainly, so we work very hard to identify the up-and-coming female and diverse population and target them to try to get them to join our company. But I think more interesting for you may be the efforts that GE Foundation has in driving STEM education at the earlier ages for people to try to get them interested in science and technology at an early age to really feed the pipeline. That's where the real activity and the fun is, I think.
Yeah, I'll give you one example. Look, I think similar to what Mark is saying, that we deal primarily with the PhD and master's level. But I would tell you that in a number of areas, and I'll just pick one, the cyber area, that we have to, those of us who touch that area of national security challenge or just business challenge, have to develop some more innovative thinking about how to broaden the pipeline into these areas. So I see Donna Crawford here, and Lawrence Livermore and Sandia are involved with the Department of Energy in a program with historically black colleges and universities to reach out to teach teachers and to pull students into intern relationships to get them truly excited and seeing the opportunity in a career that's in computer science and cyber, where we're reaching deeper at the educational level and also at the faculty level so that we can broaden that pipeline. And I think we have to look, all of us in this area, have to look at these kind of new models that can create a stronger sense of purpose and value for students who might otherwise leave the system, to see that there can be real opportunity for them by becoming more exposed and more skilled in some of these emergent areas.
So we have a number of fellowship programs that we've used as a way of sort of bringing people onto the CDC campus and actually work, whether it's for a summer, entire year, whatever the case may be. The other is we have some sort of pipeline programs both at the bachelor's levels and PhD level, MD levels. And then in our more recent efforts, whether it's with Georgia Tech and other universities, the focus really has been on engaging graduate students. just to make sure that they're familiar with different contexts in which a lot of their thinking can develop and be applied. And that has been incredibly successful. So focusing on sort of upcoming professionals, if for no other reason, just to make sure that they're aware that there's another world that maybe they didn't think of. And then depending on their experiences, actually then have them develop things that are effective for us. In fact, we just had a great success with funding sort of capstone students here at Georgia Tech, where they actually came up with a modeling on Ebola that our staff didn't even know that they were doing. When they found out about it, they said, okay, we have to use it. So now those guys are involved in sort of working with them on developing that for our internal purposes, and then they'll take it where they can.
You know, it's interesting when we talk about innovation, I stayed away from the buzzwords. We talk about collaboration, prioritization, and then inspiration. And the inspiration, when we talk about outreach, we have a number of outreach programs that are ongoing, but a number of them are focused on just keeping the younger generation and underrepresented interested in science and technology. So we have a number of programs. One would be Girls in Engineering that we started at one of our sites, and we're starting to spread it. And that's targeted middle schools for grades 6 to 8 to keep females interested in science and technology, not necessarily targeted our business, but just in general, to keep that pipeline coming up through and to give people opportunities that may even have them, but don't see themselves in those types of fields.
So, you know, Dr. Cordova mentioned in her talk about NSF's commitment to broadening participation and bringing women and underrepresented minorities into science and engineering. And just to give you a sense for how deep that commitment is, NSF spends something of the order of $700 to $800 million a year in this area. And under Dr. Cordova's leadership, just a couple of weeks ago, we launched an effort to re-envision how we are investing in this space so that we can be even more effective, because the problem is so large. And so we need to find ways in which we can be even more effective in addressing the underrepresentation issue. And so stay tuned, because I think you will see new initiatives coming from NSF in the coming years. Question over there.
Yes, a great panel. I want to kind of pick up on something Mark Little said and ask, maybe address it to Mark, but in your comments, one of the things that really stood out to me anyway is where you said we need a different, less protective models for universities, and we were talking about tech transfer, commercialization. My biggest concern in American competitiveness is we're spending billions of dollars, National Science Foundation, NIH, all fantastic, going through, as you described, the greatest university system in the country, but typically in tech transfer, commercialization, it totally gets stranded. It doesn't make its way out to the entrepreneurial side a lot of times, and maybe the holdup is that tech transfer commercialization. I have the opportunity right now. I'm serving as the chairman for commercialization at Texas A&M as a part, in addition to my regular job. And I'm seeing a lot of that. I mean, because there's different models. There's sponsored research, and then there's the spin-off type research for, as President Georgia Tech was talking, we're doing 40 spin-offs this year, want to do 100 next year, and that's totally different tech transfer commercialization. So anyway, I picked up on that, Mark, that you said different, less protective models for universities, and with the possibility of getting a lot of incredible U.S. dollars and intellectual capability and stuff stranded, just like to open that up for you.
So Jim, thanks for the question. So I think we can do more from the corporate side, and I think we can do more from the government lab side and the university side as well. I see movement on all sides. We're trying to find ways that can give the universities, for example, some of the rights that they want and some of the financial rewards that they want. At the same time, can give us access to the IP that we need to control for controlling our own destiny and our core businesses. And we're working with the national labs to try to find ways to get some more of their great technology out. I think there's work that all three parties can do, but it's an important area for us to, I think, get better at.
Yeah, this is just an area we just have to constantly work at, all right? I mean, one of the things that we're kind of intrigued at is we're trying to put in place down the block, so to speak, from the university, a Center for Collaboration and Commercialization, a place where we can bring our researchers outside the fence, because that's a particular issue we have, and put them right directly with, whether it's at the entrepreneurial level or the mid-size, or even a place where our large industrial partners can come and work, and just again create the connections that we just, you know, it doesn't seem like that big a new idea, just that we haven't followed through in creating some of these connections and pushing through some of the inhibitors. Actually, we think, you know, there's been some perhaps question about universities. We actually think part of these strategic partnerships we want to do with universities, we actually think they're better than we are at moving technology out, despite the fact that you may feel. And so we want to actually see if we can use some of their mechanisms to help us in moving some of our laboratory technology out. So I mean, it's just something we have to continue as a country to work at. It's proven, I guess, harder than I might have thought 20 or 30 years ago. It's just a constant effort required.
Anybody else wants to take that up? Let me comment from NSF perspective. This is an important problem for us, and the way we see it in our engineering research center formulations, where we want companies and university to come to IP agreements as we launch the centers. Same thing with our industry cooperative research centers. One of the things that we did recently was to give a small grant to AAU and GWIR, Government University Industry Research Roundtable, and AAU is Association of American Universities, which is an organization of leading research universities, to start a national dialogue on emerging best practices in IP in collaboration between academia and industry. So I think this is an evolving landscape. Many universities are trying new ways of approaching this issue. So I would think that as we continue to work on this, it ought to get better. But I think your point is very well taken.
It's a little separate thing, but I want to make the comment anyway. I really hope that the federal government will continue to sponsor basic research, because nobody else will. Foreign governments will. It's a really core competitive issue for the United States.
France?
You opened that door.
Microphone. Can we get can we get a microphone to Dr. Cordova?
We're not sure if we have staffers here yet from Congress. Do we have staffers? There were a couple of signed up on the list. Maybe they're not here yet.
Not
okay.
yet.
So an element that's missing from here is we fund a lot of research, but the folks that fund us are Congress, okay? And so what you just said, Mark, is just is clearly a message that we really need for Congress to internalize the importance of fundamental research and all that it's brought forth in the country, and to keep funding opportunities to do exactly what we're doing here today. And so I worry, as NSF director, as do other agency heads, that industry is completely on board with that theme, but when we talk with them individually and we say, well, in your next visit with Congress, are you going to promote this as a high priority? And they say, well, it's like number 9 or 10 on my list. Yeah. But frankly, I mean, there's that free trade agreement, and there's the tax, opportunity, and so they have just, because you only get a few minutes with your congressman, and so how do we raise something that's important to all of us to a high enough priority that, because I'm worried, especially in this climate, we've seen a real standstill come. Not a diminution in the fund. They all believe it, to a congressman. There's no single person I've met with, but you get them in a big group, and there are just other priorities. And in keeping a level budget, the other priorities and the other lobbyists, frankly, et cetera, that are in favor of those, just rise to a higher level. So what do we do about that? Because without the augmentation and funding, we can't invest in our universities. We can't invest in the collaborations you're all talking about.
I raised the point because I think it's important. I think you're exactly right. It's going to be difficult for me to get Jeff Immelt to go, and when he's seeing the president or a senator or something, to raise that as a first priority when he's worried about things like EXIM financing continuing or not. But maybe we can do some things on a consistent underpinning basis. People like me can talk about it, and get my colleagues to talk about it. I think big companies in general have that same view. I think maybe it's more of a constant communication and push for that thing as opposed to a crisis-oriented kind of communication.
And awareness.
Yeah.
Well, this is a role I think the council has helped us with, right? Because it naturally convenes these different constituencies to argue for sometimes a little longer term agenda than might be the immediacy of what you do in that elevator interaction that you get in Washington.
Well, and I'll just mention, you know, we are launching, it's been formally announced, the new Senate Competitiveness Caucus. That,
I think we need to get a microphone, Deborah, because I think they are... But I don't think it...
For the recording.
Yeah, there you go.
We're launching the new Senate Competitiveness Caucus. That's the initiative of Senator Coons from Delaware on the Democratic side and Senator Moran from Kansas on the Republican side. And so all these issues, particularly this one, under the mantle of competitiveness, we're going to be shining a big light on with activities over the next year and years to come. So this whole issue, Dr. Cordova will be one of the first ones when we get together. But also, there's a little competition because now members in the House have heard about the Senate Competitiveness Caucus and they want one. So we'll bring those together. But I think putting it under the overall mantle of economic growth and productivity and standard of living, and that this is a critical thing, elevates it from being just asking for one more thing in the competition of everything else. So we hope all of you will be part of this when we get it going on Congress soon.
Okay, over the question over there, and then go ahead.
Yes, hi, I'm Rob Duncan from Texas Tech University, and I just wanted to return to the open source innovation question. It just seems as though for early stage translation of certain developments out of universities, this is a good opportunity to really stimulate the economy. For example, IBM was really resistant to open source initially until Linux and Apache were seen as ways to really empower their business model, which was business services, not making servers, not making operating systems, but rather having the infrastructure necessary to build outstanding business services upon. And of course, from a business modeling standpoint, it's great because if you succeed then in your end market, the supplier of, say, your operating system and servers can't strategically try to walk away from you and demand, say, more resources for their components. So it seems as though there was a lot of interest by IBM for this, you know, hybrid model with open source innovation and being proprietary on the front end delivery of their end product. Another example, Washington University in St. Louis was involved in the SNAP map, single nucleotide polymorphism maps of the human genome that really kind of set the stage for the entire congenital drug discovery communities across many different companies in pharma. So are there areas where we might try to really develop open source innovation to the point where they can really stimulate a much, much greater expansion in the competitive marketplace?
I would agree with your point on that. I was thinking when we were talking about it before that we are being much more selective about where we're trying to protect IP, where we're going to try to have the open source innovation and where we're just going to try to move faster because frankly things are moving. But it is a change for us. And I think there's also the changing environment at universities, for instance, that Mark mentioned, where you know they want the IP, they want the financial rewards associated with it. I think the challenge comes when we start negotiating these deals is to come into that compromise and come into the win-win solution, you know, for both of us. And frankly, sometimes we can make it quickly, and sometimes we probably spend more time talking about the deal than we would have spent working on it. So that's where we got to get better at it, I think, and just understand that we both have changing priorities and that we both have to get something out of it.
Just to go at the two things you raised, open source software, we are very aggressively using open source software today and building out platforms for our own use and for use with our customers. And with respect to healthcare, there are a number of things that we're doing to provide tools to the research community so that they can build IP on top of that. And that's a win-win because they will get the IP, they'll do the research that they want to do, and we'll get a seeding for the kind of diagnostic tools that we want to build. So we have a number of things like that.
I would say for us, I think an area that I'm intrigued by, and I don't know if it's directly open source in the way you're defining it, but in the way in which we'll utilize additive manufacturing and 3D printing in our mainstream, that is such an area of sort of constant, rapid innovation that I don't see any reason for us to try to drive that so much internally, but to ride that wave, going to an earlier analogy of the day, that's occurring in an open sense, while we then try to bring it to our product stream.
You have the last question.
Oh, thank you. Julian Sanchez from John Deere. Mr. Bukowski actually earlier alluded to multidisciplinary, and I just wanted to, if you guys care to comment on, this is something where, as I look at one of the engines for innovation, it's tapping into young talent, most cases, that has that multidisciplinary type of training, or even just has trained themselves in a multidisciplinary type of fashion. My best software architect happens to be a biologist. One of my best engineers happens to be a great musician. And I wonder from, I think academia has began to recognize this, and they're kind of forcing all these centers and institutes within universities. Industry, it's still a difficult conversation because the pipeline is still governed by traditional human resources type of processes that don't really recognize that as a valuable asset necessarily. And then in government, I really don't see much space there yet for recognizing the potential there. It's still a very rigid type of, what degree do you have and do you meet the criteria for this job? Again, would you care to comment on whether you think that's important, first of all, and if it is, any thoughts on how we kind of place more emphasis on multidisciplinary training or individuals that are sort of drawn to it?
From a government perspective, it is incredibly challenging. Everything has to be competed. We can't, sole source anything, including personnel. I think it's less of an issue bringing people on board. So we can pretty much write a, position description that then basically, as long as people have those skills and there are certain questions that they answer to document that they have the skills, the credentialing matters less. The difficulty is after they're on board, and then how it is, again, we're talking about hierarchical, we're an incredibly hierarchical system of human resources, so that you move up the ladder depending on, what ladder you're in and those sort of things. That's what makes it challenging internally. It's after onboarding. And it's for promotion purposes. So in terms of doing the work, we do have that representation. And so you have people who have, anthropologists are working on infectious diseases. And it's like, well, what is that all about? Well, there's the behavioral science of it. So they have those skills. So that's not as much of an issue to either onboard people or to actually get the work done. It does become a significant issue, though, afterwards, if they do want to move up hierarchically in the organization. And that's something that is out of our control.
I would say, to answer your question, is important. I think it's critically important when you look at the convergence of technologies, for instance, and I think that the tangent I was coming off of is a thought that where you may think the solution's coming from, it's going to come from somewhere else now, right? So it's a totally different technology, a totally different idea that you had. So we're looking at multiple different areas, and some through these initiatives where we're putting the challenge out there, letting people virtually come together to solve it. Doesn't matter where you come from. In our talent development, we're actively moving people interdisciplinary to develop the well-rounded individual as you go up through. And then on teams, we put together, trying to make sure our leadership is trained on how they're pulling together the teams. They're not pulling together the teams that all look alike and think alike, that they're pulling from multiple disciplines, multiple generations, different backgrounds to get that diversity of thought that we need into our projects. And then as we expand outside of Lockheed Martin into collaboration, making sure that we're doing the same thing, that we're looking for people that will be additive in ideas and concepts that are additive, not just reinforcing our thoughts.
Yeah, I would just add that, and to me, an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary approach is just fundamental if you're a mission-driven organization. You just have to have that. I mean, my laboratory has a heritage that went back to Bell Labs. They ran our laboratory for 44 years. you know, if you read Innovation Factory, the book on Dell Labs, this kind of interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, just in the DNA. There's a lot of forces that can tend to drive you away from that. I think you have to resist those pretty actively, and then I think you have to go beyond that. I alluded to it before. You've got to create environments internally, and even the way you structure your research, that force these multi-perspective, multidiscipline approaches to challenging problems. Otherwise, I think in this day and age, you just don't make progress.
So GE Global Research is designed to do just what you're talking about here. We're organized by technical discipline, but everything we do is multidisciplinary. So we form teams across the disciplines to solve the complex problems that the businesses have. That's where the magic happens.
And from NSF, you know, almost every initiative, if not every initiative, is multidisciplinary. So we bring different directorates, different divisions together in supporting multidisciplinary research. Our time is nearly up, but before we end, I would like to give our panelists a chance to make one if you were to make one recommendation, what would it be? So the floor is yours.
One recommendation on the spot.
Whoever wants to go
well,
first.
I'll try. So
okay.
I have thoughts for everybody. So government, keep on doing the basic research. Government labs open up and connect up better with industry. Universities relax a little bit about IP, and corporate people like me open up and connect to all those people. Okay. So something for everybody.
Something for everybody.
But just from a government perspective, there are a lot of individual differences across the government. I think we all get approached as government, especially big government with the F for federal. But we're all very different. So for example, at CDC, we have an incredibly small research budget. We're not a research agency. We really are a public health agency. Most of that money goes out to states to actually do the surveillance and intervention. We then try to sort of carve out little things. Again, we don't have a discretionary budget, so we try to sort of pull things together. There are other agencies that are all about science, and so all the money that they have is for research. That's a very different conversation. So one of the things that I think is really critical is to be familiar with what agency, number one, you're dealing with. Should you be dealing with that agency, you may have a better chance to get whatever it is that you want done with a different agency that has a very different system for how it is that what their mandate is and how it is that their funding is allocated and governed. So I think that's something that most people don't appreciate, that there is that much diversity among all the agencies that are involved in any kind of research endeavor.
Well, I would just applaud the NSF and the council for taking on this challenge. I mean, it can be kind of nebulous and a little bit hard to, grasp, but I do think forcing those of us in the business of science and technology and innovation to deliberately think about different ways and different approaches that build upon a basic collaborative framework, I think is very valuable for us. So I appreciate your forcing us to think differently about this important topic. Thank you.
And my thought would be along the lines of Paul's, where how important this activity is. And we've talked about the global economy and its global competitiveness, but you look at it and you think about the reverse. If we lose it and we're not successful, we're trying to do what that could mean to our economy and our nation. So critically important activity.
Well, I'm sure you'll agree that this has been just a wonderful panel and a great discussion. So please join me in thanking all the panelists.